to not only right now, which is obviously a very obvious and global pause, but something I think we see on a regular basis, at least annually. You sort of get depending on what you're working on, there's sort of the seasonal aspects of some of our jobs where maybe around the holidays, December tends to slow down a little bit. You get into January like everybody else, and you've got New Year's resolutions and all that kind of stuff. And so things step up a little bit. You have a little bit of time to gather your wits, essentially, and then it's time to step into the next phase of whatever it happens to be. So what I go through is just a sort of a quick overview of this, but then a little bit of, okay, so where are we now? Some things that maybe what should we do next? Or what should we do during this pause? What are we going to do next as we come out of it? Maybe some adjustments, some things that we can learn from what we've gone through here personally, not necessarily the big picture, but these are as far as our roadmaps and some of the planning that we do. And I'll throw some like obvious prognostication type things out of there of here's some things to consider as we move forward. So right now we're sitting in the middle of this, or I guess maybe not the middle, but maybe the beginning of the end of the lockdown, or however you want to call it. It's not really a lockdown, not really a quarantine, but depending on where you are, it varies. And we're going to be coming out of it, and so things are going to start getting turned on again, and things are going to start moving forward again. That being said, obviously we've had an interesting little time here for the last 4 to 6 weeks. What we're seeing is there's a lot of things that have changed for us. There's a lot of changes that are probably coming. I think we've seen that technology has been huge in this. If you look at things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Slack and things like that maybe all of us, sort of used to some extent. We've been exposed to them, but this is becoming more of a you got grannies out there using Zoom and stuff like that. So it's definitely changing the landscape. And of course, with all this, this is a change, and so maybe we have an opportunity to take advantage of this situation and make some changes to adjust our career path or our roadmaps a little bit, and be prepared for what's coming. Obviously, I think the first big one is that remote work has suddenly become popular. I don't think managers have necessarily entirely embraced this. So that's going to be something we're going to talk about a little bit. But because people that some businesses, obviously, and entire industries are shut down, there's really nothing they can do. But then there's a lot that aren't. Obviously, the government jobs for the most part are all there. Healthcare jobs are all there. Depending on what kind of work you do, you may just be expected to do the same thing you've done in the past. It's just now you're doing it from home instead of in the office. And a lot of IT shops are having to adjust to that because now their workforce that all came into work before is, now they're having to deal with it from home. Along those lines, you've got like meetings, are now the daily meetings maybe that you had, the regular meetings you saw in the past. These are all virtual. You're seeing more and more companies are having to figure out how to work with like a Zoom or GoToMeeting or one of those kinds of tools to be able to handle meetings, to be able to handle the fact that people aren't necessarily, in an office somewhere. And even virtual meetings, we're seeing, I think some of that is different because it's a whole different aspect of having your virtual meeting where you're sitting in your office and you've got a camera on you versus where you're at home somewhere and you've got a camera on it, particularly if you don't have an office at home. There's all kinds of comments about people that are having to make adjustments because their home office is their living room or their kitchen, and you can't have dogs and cats and kids and spouses running around in the background and stuff like that. I even saw some the other day where there was a court that was having to adjust some stuff because they had like a lawyer showed up and he was, I guess, sitting on the beach somewhere or whatever, and he didn't have a shirt on, and he's sitting there talking to the judge, and some of these things that you would you would never go into the office in, well, probably not. Especially if you're a lawyer, you wouldn't go to the office in like, shirtless shorts and sandals on or something, but you may do that from home. So having to change some of those kinds of things and think about it. What are your restrictions and guidelines that you would have for work when you're not working in the office? Obviously, travel is changing a whole lot. People can't travel in a lot of cases now, and so that's changing the nature of particularly like sales and marketing and things like that were always face-to-face meetings and a handshake and stuff like that in the past. Now that's changing around. Social interaction in general, because you have this, social distancing and things that maybe, especially in the South where you always had a handshake or, people would hug and stuff like that. That's all being, I don't know if it's necessarily frowned upon, but definitely adjusting accordingly. The kinds of workspaces that we've had in the past, when you think of open office plans and desk sharing and stuff like that, that kind of stuff is most likely going to change as we move forward. And of course, with all of this remote everything, the network's getting flooded. There is a change in somebody having a desktop or a laptop at work, and now they've got to have something at home. And instead of having your maybe wired in network at work, now you've got to be maybe wireless or be able to support the fact that not everybody has gig connections to their house. I don't know how many people use dial-up anymore. I assume it's still out there somewhere, but even low-end cable connections and stuff like that, it's sad to say in some sense, but 1 megabit, 5 megabit connections, sometimes it's too slow, particularly if you're having to do some sort of a virtual connection, as opposed to being able to use just connect periodically. If you're having to actually share video and stream video across the network, you can bury it pretty quick. And if you have kids at home that happen to be watching YouTube while you're trying to work, obviously that can be an issue. So these are just a handful of things that we're dealing with, we collectively are dealing with on a daily basis right now. Some things to think about as we're thinking about this, looking at all this. Some of this stuff is going to be temporary. There are things like everything. I mean, we can look back, probably the most recent huge, big, monumental change was 9/11. And you saw, for the first couple of years, travel was very different and very restricted, but then it started to change and things settled in. And although we now go through scans that in the U.S. that we never had to deal with in the past before 9/11, that things have changed, but then in many ways things have sort of returned to normal to some extent. But during this time of turmoil, this is going to open up opportunities. You see this where there's all kinds of apps that are being thrown out there for various reasons to help people out. Some of these niche kinds of things or things that were maybe not as popular, like a Zoom, be a good example, suddenly are becoming very popular. It's sort of the right time and the right place. And one of the things to think about at this point that is for us is look at like, okay, were you ready? Were you situated in a way that allowed you to work, and not just the technology pieces of it, but at home, what kind of, like your workspace, did you have a decent desk or a chair? What kinds of things did you have in place to allow yourself to work remotely? Were you able to do that? Did you have, if you had some downtime with work, did you have something to be able to take advantage of that, quote, free time? Did you have, something in your roadmap, your career roadmap or your plans that you were able to, shift over to pretty quickly and take advantage of this and, maybe, move forward on that? For example, Dave working on the Java certification stuff, being able to go get that thing done, being able to look at places like Pluralsight and that to go out and do some additional training with this time that you're at least not spending on the road, commuting back and forth to your job. So we are where we are right now, and so let's think about what are some of the things that maybe we should do that are that maybe we've learned from this, or that we can use, that we can take advantage of this time. The first one, I think it's very important, is to, and this maybe it's because I've personally have reviewed this as well, but learn from your adjusted schedule. We have a different schedule right now, most likely, unless you were full-time remote before, that you've probably made some changes, maybe to what your work hours are. If you didn't work remote before, probably your day has spread out a little bit more. Maybe you've worked in instead of going to lunch each day. Maybe you go for a jog, or you do a little, workout at, sit on got a little bike that you can, work on, or maybe you've got a couple of hobbies that you've been able to, work that in during the day. Take a look at what you've done, and hopefully there's been a little less stress. It seems like, I think, a lot of people, there is less stress. It's less of a go kind of lifestyle. Personally, I see people out walking around their neighborhood, and it feels like 20 or 30 or 40 years ago or something like that, when people actually weren't plugged in all the time and running around with a hectic lifestyle. So take a look at that, and maybe this is a good opportunity if you look at what really makes you happy. This is the being better is not necessarily that you know more, did more, earn more, or something like that, but it's, maybe it's a good time to take a little stock of not necessarily work-life balance, but just personally what makes you happy? What really are the things that you do like to do? And this could be from a technical point of view as well. Maybe there's some work-related stuff that you've got a little more clarity on. What is it that I like to do? Do I like to code? Do I like to test? Do I like to do project planning? Do I like to do work on the front end, the back end, stuff like that? Maybe there's some things here that have been more apparent. It'll help you make some better selections moving forward as far as what really matters to you. What really do you want to focus on? So maybe with that, you make some adjustments to your goal. It's a good time to take a look at what assuming that you have some sort of a career roadmap. If you don't, it's a good time to maybe put one together. What are some things that you want to accomplish? Where do you want to be in a year, 3 years, 5 years? If you've got something, maybe there's some goals there that you want to adjust. Maybe you don't care as much about being a master of 50 different platforms, and instead you're like, you know what? I think I want to spend some time learning how to, juggle or ride a unicycle or something like that. There's all kinds of different things that it's a good opportunity for us to figure out what really drives us, or should drive us maybe. With all of that being, keeping that in mind, my thought is be ready for a push forward. When stuff starts getting turned on and businesses start opening, I think there's going to be a flood of, there's going to be some people that are going to be scared and tentative and sit back, and definitely some populations of people that are really realistically so are going to be tentative going back out, because they are that, if you're in that high risk population or whatever. But then you're going to have a lot of people that, right now, as we sit here, I think the last numbers are like 24 million people out of a job. And of course, all these businesses that shut down, a lot of them laid people off, and now they're going to, or let people go, and now they're opening back up. And so there's going to be a lot of hiring. There's going to be a lot of people looking for jobs. There's going to be a lot of these companies a lot of places have got backlogs of work. I mean, some things, like a hairstylist, if you didn't get your hair cut a month ago, it's not like you're going to suddenly do 2 haircuts in a week to make up for it. But if you look at things like I said, for example, courts, they've got a backlog of cases, healthcare stuff. They've got all this elective surgery and stuff that was pushed off. There's certain things that you still need to do. Banks and financial institutions, I'm sure there's going to be a flood of, which there is already. There's a flood of people looking for loans. There's a flood of people that are going to be trying to get bills paid and things caught up. Support, phone support, stuff like that. There's going to be a lot of industries where there's going to be a big push as people start getting back to full speed again. So I think And I think a lot of us are going to be sort of ready for that. After you've spent a month and a half sitting in your house, you're going to be happy to go to an office and to be able to interact with people again, and to, particularly if work has been slow, to be able to jump back in and actually work again. So I think there is going to be a strong push forward, that we're going to see an urgency to get stuff done again. During this time, it's a good time to take stock of where you were at, and what you're doing moving forward. Maybe it's a time to pivot a little bit. So maybe there's some things that are basically where you can declare victory and move on. Maybe there's some hobbies that you were working on, some skills you were working on, some things you were working on that trying to, in making yourself better, that you can say, you know what, I think I'm done with that. I'm ready to change. Maybe you were working on a language you wanted to, let's say you wanted to learn Swift, and you've gotten to a point maybe during this time that you can say, you know what, I think I've learned it enough. It's time for me to move on to something else, or to apply that. So don't be afraid to use this as a time to say, okay, I can stop what I was doing, I can declare victory, and I can move on to something new. So in your next steps, so with all of this, what do we want to do? Well, one of the things I think is, as a regular kind of thing anyways, take a look at your schedule, do some resets where you need to, with these things we've talked about that make you happy, that make your life fuller. Maybe adjust your schedule a bit. Maybe this adjusted schedule that you've been sort of forced into the last few weeks is something that you want to make more permanent. So maybe you get up a little earlier, or you spend a little less time sitting in the office, or you have some other things that you did that you realize were maybe not the best use of your time. Make changes for that. If you realize that suddenly you like having maybe an evening off every so often, put that into your schedule. Adjust your plan so that you can do that. For any of these, if you've been able to take advantage of this time, and you've got some side projects, side hustle, hobbies, or things that you've been able to move forward, that you've been able to work on, be ready for the fact that you may have to pause those, because now you're going to get back to maybe not having as much free time. So make sure you're looking at finding a suitable stopping point, so that you can adjust to having a lot more hours to work on that than you will probably as things start moving forward again. Learn from this. Take a look at what, this goes back to how prepared were you for this, particularly like side projects and some of the other things that we've got on our, nice to haves. Were you in a situation where when you had some free time, you're able to use that to pursue some of those nice to haves? And if not, then maybe, set yourself up so you can. A lot of times I think of like side hustle projects where it's a coding or something like that, or solving some problem that nice to have application I wanted to build. Well, if I got to this point and I spent most of my time trying to remember where was I at, how far had I gotten, what were my goals for this anyways, if I was basically having to spend a lot of time trying to spin this back up, then there's some time that I lost out on. So maybe I want to look forward, as I plan for a pause. Maybe I want to put together a couple of documents for myself, or something that's basically hey, here's where I'm at, here's what my next plans were, so that next time I have some time, I can more quickly ramp up to it instead of losing a lot of time switching gears. I think this is a great time also to take advantage of people's approaches to, and their thoughts about things like remote work, and how people work, and what's important and what's not, what's essential and what's not, even within individual jobs. So I think, if you're looking for a change from your boss, if you've looked at that, or your employer, if you've looked at that for a while, maybe you want to maybe you're in a situation where they're not open to remote work normally, but you would love for that to be something that's a regular option. It's a good time for you to think about, sort of put a little list together of, hey, here's what benefits can come from us continuing this moving forward. So maybe this is something where you can look at what you've done and how you've been productive, what you've achieved during this time, as a way to take it to your employer, or your next employer, if when you're thinking about where you want to go next down the road, and say, hey, here's some things that I think are some good reasons for us to maybe allow for regular remote work, or to allow meetings to occur through to use Zoom or whatever the tool is for our meetings, instead of us having to go to a room and stuff like that. Or if you're in a situation where you've had to travel, it's like, hey, maybe we don't need to travel so often to do some of these things. Maybe we can reduce, perfect reasons for a change. We can reduce travel costs, and we can reduce general stress and stuff like that, make a happier, healthier workforce. And generally, look at the fact that this may be a new world that we walk into in the weeks ahead. It will obviously be slightly different, maybe majorly different, and look for some ways to maybe embrace it. Take that positive approach instead of the oh my gosh, what have we lost, or something like that. Instead, take advantage and say, well, maybe we can, how can we make this better at a personal level, at a professional level, your organization, and beyond that, even out to just, again, as always, not to wear it out, but to become a better developer, but also better, maybe in this case, even a little bit of a better person in a happier sense. Some adjustments you may want to do, want to look at moving forward, is how well did you handle this remote work stuff? If it was a pain, then maybe you want to make some adjustments. Maybe you want to put on your planning a way to have maybe a workspace, or a nice desk at home, or a better chair, or maybe a room or somewhere that you can go, that you can do a remote meeting and not have to worry about people in your bothering you with it, or even making sure that you have a high enough speed connection moving forward, if that's an option. Making sure that you've got a work, a laptop or work laptop or something like that has like maybe a camera included if you need that. Those kinds of things. Is what were your struggles? What are some of the problems that you've faced recently? And have that as a list of maybe some things that you want to address. I talked about this a little bit when we started out this mentor class. Was Amazon has opened up. It's just one of many places that has some deals during this time. And GitHub, for example, is another one that has changed. I don't know if it's related to this or not, but they've changed some of their rules and restrictions around public about sharing repositories and having users look at your repositories. And there's a lot of cloud apps and tools that have existed in the past, and they're making some changes to make it easier for a remote workforce. There's definitely some new tools and apps, particularly if you look in the cloud world. If you look at like your Azures and your Amazons and your Googles, there's a lot of stuff out there, and there has been, honestly, for a while. All of those companies are churning out new features and new tools on a regular basis. But maybe it's a good time for you to take a little bit of time and look at what's out there. There may be something out there that really solves a problem that's been driving you nuts. Maybe as simple as a select all for a series of checkboxes, and maybe something much more complicated, particularly things like maybe a better email client, or a better chat type client, or work sharing client, or document sharing tool, all that kind of stuff that we run into, that maybe some new things have popped up that will make your life a little easier. Based on all this, maybe you adjust your budget and your goals a little bit, as far as in that time, maybe a monetary budget, or maybe your time budget is looking at what makes you happy and what your goals are. Particularly if you're adjusting your roadmap, then maybe you want to adjust how you tackle that. Maybe you've looked at stuff and found that it's not as useful for you to start, have 15 minutes at the beginning of your day. Maybe you'd be better off to push that 15 minutes during your lunch break, or at the end of the day. Or maybe you've been spending an hour a day and you want to cut back to 30 minutes a day, or vice versa. Use all of this, and let's make some adjustments, and dare I say, plan out a little bit, how you want to approach things moving forward. As I said before, claim victory for your completed goals There's so often that we've come back to the whole perfection being the enemy of good. Take a look at some of the things you've done, and maybe you're spending a little too much time trying to get to 100% done when 80% was really what was going to allow you to move forward faster. So don't be afraid to look at some things and say, hey, I think I've done that good enough that I can take my next steps, that I can cross that off and I can move on to the next item. And of course, once you plan all this stuff out, then let's, by all means, set what your new day is going to look like, and step into that, embrace it. Maybe as we sort of open things up, then maybe you use that much as a January 1st is often used as a time to say, okay, this day I am going to start with this new plan, and I'm going to start anew. I can throw out the fact that maybe I didn't succeed as much on some of these goals in the past weeks or months or years, and I'm going to, hey, tomorrow's a new day. I'm going to take advantage of it. So some prognostications, just to throw some easy stuff out there, sort of looking into a crystal ball kind of thing. But I think it's some things for us to think about is, maybe spend a little time thinking about maybe these are some things, some opportunities we can take advantage of. First and foremost, I think remote work is going to be easier to request than it's ever been in the past. I think it has been it's been steadily easier and easier, but I think it will be far easier to do this in the next couple of months than it has been in the past. You can always lean back on I'm worried about getting sick, and whether that's true or not, that's something that your boss or manager will have to respect. And I think they'll allow you an opportunity to maybe take advantage of this. And by take advantage too is like make sure that, as always, I personally think it's easier to be more productive working remotely. It's easier when you don't have people dropping in at your desk on random times through a day. But if you're wired that you can do that, then make sure that you are that you take advantage of that time to be more productive, to make better use of those hours. I think because of this, because there's going to be more remote work, and because managers are still managers, and some like to micromanage or to know what's going on at a very detailed basis. I think we're going to see more monitoring options that are going to be pursued by organizations and by tools. And actually, even as we mentioned earlier in this meeting, I think there's going to be individual health-related monitoring options that are going to come out of this. We have definitely seen, as has been forecast for years, that a smaller world also means one that it's easier for stuff to travel. We've seen that now as stuff has gone all over the world. And I think there's a lot of countries are embracing the ability to monitor people more closely. And I think that's just going to continue. There's going to be more, that means there's going to be more health data out there, more general data out there. And that means there's going to be more tools and desire to pursue utilizing that data to map all sorts of different things, and including, the moving of healthy people and unhealthy people and things like that. With all this, obviously, I think the cloud is going to be more popular than ever because, software as a service and the ability for companies to allow their employees to access stuff outside of the office is going to be a bigger deal. Related to that, although I didn't actually have it on this list, is security is going to change and going to be a big deal. In the past, you were able to just say, okay, we're going to lock everything down, and you have to come to the office to have access to some of this stuff. Now, VPNs and things like that, secure ways to access data outside of the office, I think are going to become maybe not necessarily a need, but definitely a nice to have. I'm even seeing this already in places like law firms that in the past they were able to just lock everything in and have an intranet. Now they're realizing that they have to have the ability for their attorneys to be able to actually log in remotely. And so that changes the security landscape quite a bit. And that means there's going to be a lot of changes related to that. So although security has been a steadily growing important piece of companies and organizations, it obviously, I think it's just going to continue to grow and maybe even explode as we're going to have companies that thought they would be able to sort of, in a sense, shelter in place and protect their, everything within their walls, and that is easier to protect. Now they're having to open stuff up, and once you start opening holes in those walls, you've got a lot of security issues that need to be addressed related to it. Alternatives to travel I think are going to be explored. There's a lot of things that have pointed to this being a change that we're going to see, and the whole what happens if a country, in the future, now that we've locked the world down, what happens as we move forward and regions and countries decide that they will do travel bans and lockdowns and things like that to avoid stuff like this in the future. And of course, I mentioned before, there's going to be a hiring frenzy. If nothing else, whatever it's at, and I don't know what the percentage is right now, but even the U.S., when you've got millions of people that are unemployed, a lot of it because companies are shut down. Well, when those companies turn back on, they're going to have to hire people, and you're going to see a weird little adjustment because you're going to have some of these places like Amazon that have been shipping like mad and have been hiring like mad. Well, as things adjust, then probably they'll have some of those people that are actually going to end up getting laid off because they won't need them as much. And then, it's going to be sort of a shift back to some of these other traditional jobs maybe that weren't available for them during this time. That being said, I'm going to throw it out to questions and comments.
I wanted to throw a few things in there. Already, some of the changes that have come about through this self-quarantine type thing is healthcare changes. I've had parents that have already had at least 3 different appointments that they've done via video chat and with apps that they run off their phone to present stuff to their medical providers and stuff like that. So that's a pretty significant change. It's going to also change the healthcare model of how they bill, because if they can do this remote, do they need as much of an office, but they still have to pay the salary? So you're going to see a lot of changes, I believe, there.
That's a really good, just as a follow-up to that real quick, that's a really good point, is that, I have seen a flood of teledoc-related apps just in the last couple months. I mean, it's been growing, and there's a lot of places that have been dipping a toe in. But, I think there's a lot of them that said, forget it, we're not dipping a toe in, we're just jumping in and seeing what we can do.
Yeah. And also with the remote work, there were a lot of places like WeWork that were doing shared spaces. That's going to have to really be reevaluated, because you're not going to be able to hotbox the stations, and you're not going to want as many people in as close. So that new model that people were trying to pursue is really going to have to take a real step back and figure out different ways to do that. They were already talking about their private rooms being like full of formaldehyde and stuff like that because they were so close spaced. It's going to be interesting how a lot of those things get addressed.
Yeah, I think those plans are going to those will change. I actually have one of those kinds of offices that I'd rented for the last couple of years. And I actually had, the one I was at was pretty well spaced out, but there were definitely some of the, since you can buy space and then fill it out, sort of lay it out however you want to. Some places, they were packing people in there. I mean, you'd have, 5 or 6 people in a space that for me, that was like, my space alone, they were probably putting 5 and 6 people in that same kind of a space. And so I think you're going to see, generally, I think you're going to see people not wanting to be sardined in as much. And that's going to be interesting to see how that impacts their ability to work. And actually, I think one of those, I can't remember which one it was. I don't know if it was WeWork. One of them, I think they're working on declaring bankruptcy after this period because of all they had a couple of months of people not wanting to do that. And they had this, all this space rented, and suddenly the demand dropped. So there's going to be, that landscape will definitely change. Excellent points.
Another thing I wanted to say for people that have not spent as much time doing remote work, even when people were going into the office, there was starting to become a lot more pushback about turnoff times. Getting a call from or a text from your boss at 10 o'clock at night and expected to do something right then. I think people need to be very cognizant about uh, setting some planned times and then turning it off. You need that time for yourself. Otherwise, you never leave work. You've got to be able to turn that off and go about the rest of your life, not always just work.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think it's a lot harder it's been harder and harder for people to work an actual 40-hour work week. It's, you don't know what the actual hours are, but it seems like it just bleeds to 45 and 50 and 60 when you consider, you get an email at the, right at the dinner table, you get an email. It's like, oh crap, I guess I got to go, do this work thing, or on a Saturday or on a Sunday or late at night. And especially as we have these, especially technology, when you've got teams that are working literally around the clock because they're around the world. Yeah, I think it's really good for us. That's one of the things that maybe you want to change is set and be a little more intentional about personal time and personal hours that are your non-work hours, where if something comes in, it's like, nope, I'm going to wait and I'll take care of that next day I'm at work, because it'll still be there.
Right. And
Great
one last thing I wanted to bring up had to do with your discussion on security. People are trying to talk about, they've been using VPNs for a while, but the big thing that I'm seeing in the security world now is more of a push toward zero trust, where nobody is a trusted partner. You basically have to prove who you are and what you have reason for at each step through what you're doing. It's called more of a zero trust model. And I really think we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming days. I think cloud has pushed a lot of that as people are getting away from having the outside perimeter. So, this is just something that I think people need to be keeping on their radar and possibly looking at when they see articles on what zero trust is. It right now does not have a vendor. It's mostly a grow your own that companies are doing, but I think it's a real high growth area in the coming future. So just some notes on things to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's excellent. Zero trust and multi-factor authentication have really become big. I don't know, last 6 months, last year. Again, I'm not sure how far back when it really started to step up. But yeah, and I think the SaaS and the cloud models are really driving that. So it's that's probably going to be a hot thing for a while.
Interesting, you talking about multi-factor authentication. I broke my phone the other day, had to revert back to my other one. But when you've had multi-factor authentication, it gets really squirrely when you're trying to transfer that. That's actually something that I'm setting up as one of my goals, is to go through those transfers and document it for people, so that I was very scared as I was doing it, to the point that I turned it off before I proceeded, just because if you get locked out, how much grief are you going to go through to get back into what you need?
Yeah.
So just my few points to make on what we've discussed, but opportunities for problems and opportunities for growth.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent points all around. Anyone else? Any other questions and comments?
I was just going to say that, my team, specifically our department, has been politicking for 100% remote. And times like these really do show who can handle that privilege. And so whenever you're working from home, I'm not sure. I think trying to think of who all works from home. I know Rob for sure, but all that said, um, if you're working for a company and they're hesitant. Show them in this time. I think Rob said it in this presentation. Show them in this time that you can get the work done and do it well, if not better, and more efficiently from a work from home situation. And then I forgot the second point I was going to make, but that's okay. It probably wasn't important. So, yeah.
No, good point. And I know a lot of places that people have been politicking for that, for, at least some remote, if not, entire remote. And particularly because so many of our jobs, I think we realize that technically we could be remote. Security concerns aside, there's not much that we have to actually do face to face. So, but in a sense, be careful what you ask for. So if you're going to do it, if you're allowed to do it, as you have been, maybe now, make sure you take advantage of it so that there's no regrets about that, so that that you can follow up on what you were, the promise of this will be better. And it is. I've done this for a long time, and I think for myself, it does require some planning and some discipline, but there's so many things I've been able to do because of my ability to work remote at times, as far as being productive for my employer, but also for myself to be able to get a whole lot of it's amazing how much you can get done in a day when you're waiting for a compile to happen, and you can actually do something a little more productive than sit there and stare at a screen. So it's definitely worthwhile.
Agreed.
I think it's a win-win if you do it right.
Agreed. I remember my second point as well, and it may be more of a question. In terms of where our industry is going in terms of technology, I look at, I should say, there's talk about how new developers are coming into these roles, and they're talented and so on and so forth, and they're almost requiring that the role that they step into be more remote than in office. Are y'all seeing that as well? And do you think that with times like these, or I'm sure with times like these, that's an easier ask than in the past, and maybe will it stay an easy ask going forward?
I almost think it's a mix, because where I'm at, there's a lot of jobs that, yes, you can do them remotely, but the problem is the types of people that typically you have to hire to do that job are people that need more overview or oversight. So unless you really have those monitoring tools in place, it's really hard to implement that. But, that being said, though, again, it's like your security tools and things like that, like Teams or Slack or, I guess, Zoom. You just got to make sure everything's secure. And you, as a manager, you have to find a way to just keep on top of that. But it does make it hard, especially like call centers and things like that, where the current model has always been like the boiler room, where everyone's in one room answering phones. So it's a little harder to kind of make that remote or shift to that remote type basis.
Yeah, I think there's some people that, like, particularly when you're just starting out your career, it's very hard to do that, because I think you do need a lot of which is one of the tools we're going to have, people are going to have to figure out how to work out, is the idea of just the learning by osmosis you get in a standard office situation, where you've got things going on around you, and you got people you can talk to real quickly, and you're comfortable with it. The sharing of information that comes from those environments is invaluable in some cases, particularly starting off your career. So while I think companies are more organized or more able to do that, you see more people that have like laptops instead of desktops and things like that allow them to be mobile. I don't know, and I don't see enough of that, but so I'll leave that to the other guys to see what's actually happening in the landscape. But I think there's still a lot of challenges to work out with it.
I think there are, but there are also new things that have come about that could really help with that. For example, in the case of a new developer coming online, with Amazon, you have things like Cloud9, which work as a shared model, so you can actually have multiple people working out of the same Cloud9. So you couple that with things like the video conferencing and being able to speak and talk like this, you can almost have the pair programming regardless of where they're physically located. So there are advances being made, but I don't think that anybody's really gotten a good handle on how to leverage those tools well yet.
I'm sorry, Michael. I heard the first few words and the last few words. My internet or my phone cut off. But that said, I guess I got the gist with Rob's response or follow up to what you said around, the learning by osmosis. I get that. I was wondering, exactly what I think. Is it Franklin? I'm sorry, we haven't met, but
yes.
But yeah, exactly what you're saying, like in the virtual sense of how our communication can evolve, and how we can indeed get that learning by osmosis, like that presence of just the office and everything that comes with it, but virtually. And if technology is really moving in that direction, or whether we think it is, and it's really kind of, I don't know how to phrase it. How should we look at that? How should we look at technology in the sense that we can do what we're discussing, these new developers learning by osmosis, but still, remote?
I think we're going to all have to work as our own advocates. I mean, when you find good tools, you have to present them and present good test cases. And, the same reason that we're all here. We're here to discuss things and think about how to do things better and support one another along that journey. So I think we all have to advocate for what's good for us, but also take the perspective of we're going to have a lot of management teams that are going to have a lot of trouble with this, because many managers are far too micro-manage centric. They don't trust that people will do the work that needs to be done. So, and there are some people that will not do the work that needs to be done. So it's almost going to have to be, it used to be that people said you've got your X type manager that says people will always do the wrong thing. You've got the Y manager that says person will always do the right thing. And then you got the Z manager that has to recognize the difference and know how to manage people differently. So just my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a continued, I don't know, divergence or whatever of people that are, I guess, not even necessarily self-starters, but it almost goes back to just have a work ethic, and those that maybe don't. It'll be interesting because I think there are, you have people that are driven, there are people that aren't, and there's people that need a nudge, and it's the need a nudge people that I think it'll be interesting to see how they progress in this kind of an environment where it'll be challenge to managers, because I think you won't have the same kinds of tools you had in the past to be able to check up on people and to do things like even just like management by walking around, which I think, Timothy, that's sort of my style. It's just sort of like, you catch people, you talk to them, you see what's going on. It's not like Slack and some of those things don't necessarily offer the same types of interactions. So it'll be interesting to see how that can be used to nudge people, to check in with people, and to read, when a team is struggling. As a manager, part of the goals, or really what your primary goal should be, is getting the people who work for you to be as productive as possible, get things out of their way, help solve problems that are slowing them down. It's going to change how people need to speak up more to be able to help out. It's going to be harder to in some cases, I think, to see that somebody's struggling. So it will, I think things will adjust. If you look over at over my career, I'd see how there have been management buzzwords or approaches to adjust as the world has changed. We've got stuff now that the internet didn't exist back when I started, or at least, for the most part didn't, and not at all like it does today. So we've made adjustments over the years of how, what kind of information is available to people, and helping and empowering, was a buzzword for years, empowering employees. I think that's going to by its nature continue. But I think we also see that when you look at like the gig economies and things like that, the employees coming into the workspace seem to be a little more independent in their careers. I mean, you definitely don't see people almost at all anymore that think that, hey, I'm going to go work for company X and be there until I retire. They're much more and are trained, even in schools. They're taught more to be take more ownership over their own careers and paths. And I think that sort of feeds into the idea of wanting to attend, mentoring and mastermind groups and take advantage of all the training that's available out there. YouTube videos to do anything, whatever it is, whether you want to, I don't know, fry an egg or rebuild an engine block, there's stuff out there. So I think it's going to be a changing landscape, but I think it's not going to be an instant kind of thing. And you will start seeing more tools and more ways to make that available. As people realize the problems involved, there's going to be solutions provided for it.
That's good. That's good. I'm hearing that as the technology evolves to allow for this type of work, we also have to evolve our communication to just voice up when we're able to do something, when we got roadblocks or so on and so forth. It's just the communication and the technology evolving together. That's good.
Yep. Any other questions or comments?
I was going to say that's kind of the biggest thing I've run into dealing with new hires. Every person I hire to try and help with testing, the biggest problem is getting them to communicate that, hey, I'm stuck, or hey, I've got a problem. Because I guess over the years, there's just this mentality that if you have a question or if you can't do it, then you don't know what you're doing and you're going to get fired. So it's one of the things that I think needs to change out of this too, is that, definitely how we communicate to one another and how we communicate through our projects and just our jobs needs to change slightly.
That's good.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. So what did we learn? Wrapping this one up. This has been obviously hopefully a once in a lifetime kind of thing. Definitely monumental up to this point. But I think it's a good example that we should prepare for the fact that there are going to be pauses and things that will cause us to change our work habits. It may be an organizational thing. It could be a worldwide pandemic kind of thing. It could just be our boss, or us being transferred to somewhere else in the same company. We should always sort of keep an eye out for some things that we can do that will make us better, more productive, and try not to get ourselves locked into some sort of a schedule or approach that ends up causing us problems when things have to change. Definitely the world's gotten smaller. We're able to connect with people far faster and easier than ever before. So maybe these are some things that we can take advantage of. Regardless of what's going on, whether it's good or bad news, there's ways for us there's always problems to solve. And so there's always ways that we can advance our cause, our personal or organizational causes forward. Take a look at when there's change, there's some ways for us to adapt to it and maybe make things easier for ourselves and the others around us. Just continuously improving. We may be able to look back at some of this and see how our continual little steps, maybe even baby steps from day to day, have led to some great gains. Some of these victories that we maybe have been able to declare during this time, where we can look back and say, hey, I made huge progress on this. I think I can move on to something else. We can see where we had some great gains during that time. And related to that is sometimes we just need to learn when to complete something, declare victory, say that we're done, or turn something off and move on to something else. Maybe we decide that this wasn't something that we liked as much as we thought we did, and it's time to change gears. And to be able to say no, or just say, all right, done, I'm going to move on to something else. So I moved my questions and comments, so I'll just skip that slide. As always, appreciate your time, and if there's any additional discussion or anything like that, you can always catch us. info@developerpreneur.com for email. We do have a contact us form there on Developerpreneur that I sometimes check, that we check regularly enough. Twitter @Developerpreneur. We still do regular stuff, as all of our podcasts and video stuff is out there, as well as just news of the world that we see. And we post all our stuff out to Facebook on Developerpreneur. You can check that out as well. As always, just trying to make every developer a little better day by day.